Hello everyone and welcome to Star Wars on High. Thank you for stopping by and happy Halloween. We are back with another Legends book review, and since it's Halloween, I figured I'd do something fun and review the classic Legends novel, Death Troopers. Now, I did try to read this once way long ago when it came out in 2009. I couldn't get into it. I had a lot of trouble reading, public school. So Death Troopers was originally published in 2009, written by Joe Schreiber, and it was the first horror novel for Star Wars. At least to my knowledge, it was. I remember seeing the cover of the book on the shelf at the library when it had just come out, and I was like, ooh, I really want to read this, and my mom was like, no, I don't need you reading this. And I mean, looking back at the cover, I completely understand why, because this is pretty gruesome. It did just recently get an Essential Legends reboot, so it has a new cover I'm not too much of a fan of, but it has a new great audiobook that I listened to, and this book is something. It is not what I was expecting, and I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. The basis of the book is about two brothers, Trig and Kale, who are aboard a prison barge called the Purge. At some point during their travels, the hyperdrive gives out, and they are stuck in dead space with nothing around them, except for a coincidental Star Destroyer that seems to be all on its own. There is nothing aboard it, and they are not receiving comms from them at all, even when they ask for help. It isn't until they dock with the Star Destroyer that they realize that there is something else going on inside. Throughout the book, we have some interesting characters. We have the two main brothers, Kale and Trig. We also have Dr. Sahara Cody, or just Dr. Cody, and her medical droid that she calls Waste, either because he's a waste of parts, a waste of space, or bodily waste. I don't know, it's kind of rude. I like droids, but anyway. There's also the crazy captain of the guard, Jareth Satoris, who thinks he has a complex over everyone, and we have a pretty interesting cameo appearance from Han Solo and Chewbacca. Now, going into this book, I knew that Han and Chewie were already in the story. I wasn't sure as to why they needed to be, and I still don't think they needed to be in it. However, I like how they were introduced, because it really wouldn't make much sense for them to just show up and try to rescue people, especially in dead space in the Outer Rim. But knowing that they were actually prisoners on the Purge, I thought that was pretty clever, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So the Purge ends up having a problem with its hyperdrive. It comes out of space, finds the Star Destroyer, boards with the Star Destroyer to try to harvest parts to fix their hyperdrive, when suddenly stuff starts going wrong. Some of the search crews go out into the Star Destroyer and don't come back, and those that do come back are violently ill. Now, up until this point, there was really only one book that made me nauseous while reading it, and that was The Krytos Trap by Michael Stackpole, because he had some very detailed explanations as to what that virus does to the body, and it was really gross. But this is on a whole nother level, and it makes me wonder why we need horror in Star Wars, because I don't think we do. I will say that there are a lot of aspects of this book that I really enjoy, especially the build up to the zombie stormtroopers that we end up getting because of this virus. But when it comes to the level of horror that actually comes out of Death Troopers, I feel like a lot of it is just truly unnecessary, and I feel like it just didn't translate too well, at least for me, because it takes so long to get there. We just have people getting sick, and then they're dying, and then there's bodies laying all over the Star Destroyer, and at some point, they're all gone. I thought that was really well done, because that's a classic horror trope, and I was here for that one. But there are some moments in this where it just gets so graphic and really violent, and it just begs the question of, do we really need to continue having horror stories in Star Wars? Because it just felt wildly unnecessary for some of the moments. For example, we know that one of the brothers ends up getting bit by one of the zombies, which obviously means he's infected and he's going to start changing soon, and he's really worried about that. And at some point when Dr. Cody is dragging him away from a group of zombies, which by the way are very smart, they learn how to access weapons and use systems, so that's pretty crazy. But as she's dragging him away, one of the zombies fires and blows part of his face off, and it's just ridiculous in the way it's described, and how there's just this nice crescent hole in his face, and just why do we need this? The real turning point for me was when Satoris ends up climbing into a shuttle to defend himself from the horde of zombies coming after him, and he finds 7 Imperial officers that have barricaded themselves in there that are pretty much skin and bones. He learns that there were originally 30 of them, and they were in there for 10 weeks, but now there's only 7 because they had to resort to cannibalism. Again, I ask, why was this made? Because that We don't need to see that. But the book tries to have a good balance between freakish horror and some actual real emotional moments. There was two scenes in particular when I was reading the book when I was like, wow, I was reading this in hopes of getting like a little, I wanted to get scared from this. I didn't want to get real emotional and start crying because there's some moments that are really sad. There's a moment where they're walking through the purge and they're going through all the prison cells trying to see if any prisoners have survived so they can give them an antidote so they also aren't turned. Upon opening one of the cells, we find a child Wookiee, an infant Wookiee, crying while holding the paws of his dead parents to his face. Like, I didn't need that kind of emotional scarring from this. We also have a moment where there's a security guard who realizes he's been infected and he's starting to turn, and he creates a holo message for his wife saying that he has been infected with this virus and he's probably not coming home, and please tell my kids that their dad loved them. Like, it gets so emotional for no reason. They had no business being this emotional, or truly it didn't, but I guess you needed that to balance out how ridiculous some of this book actually is. And speaking of ridiculous, when we go back to Han and Chewie, like I said earlier, them being prisoners on the purge, that makes sense. That's if you're going to use these characters in the book, that would be the best way for them to be introduced, and I thought that was really clever. But I feel like they have as much involvement and weight to this story as Indiana Jones did in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like, if he was not in the story, it would have gone the same route. So if Han and Chewie weren't on the purge, this book would have ended pretty much the same way. You could have just used any two prisoners in this book, and it would have done the same effect. I don't know that it needed to be Han and Chewie, but, I mean, it's not the end of the world for me. Overall, though, I got really mixed feelings from this book, and I feel very underwhelmed. The cover of the book looks amazing, and this is exactly why they say don't judge a book by its cover. Now, if you love this book, that's perfectly fine. It just wasn't for me. I don't know. This is not what I was expecting. It got a little too dark, and that's just an idea of Star Wars that we don't need. I'm not someone that says we need to have R-rated Star Wars films or anything that's horror related, because this book is a prime example of it just doesn't work. And some of the moments where the horror does work, it works very well. There's a moment where Dr. Cody comes back to the medical wing where all of the bodies are gone. She doesn't know what happened. She sees her medical droid just destroyed on the ground, and he's like speaking in riddles almost. He's like, oops, sorry, they all woke up. And like the way he's talking to her, that's creepy. That's suspenseful. That's good story right there. The actual graphical horror moments of it, like this horde of zombies just climbing over each other and trying to kill everyone, I don't know. It's weird to me. Now, I will say I find it interesting that the virus itself is called the Blackwing virus or the Blackwing Project, and that has actually been brought into canon. So the idea of that is still canon. The book, however, is still legend. So whether or not that could come again, I'm not sure, but I know that was brought into canon because the actual Death Troopers that we see in Rogue One, like the actual, the black clad armor, they are supposed to be named after the Blackwing Project. So it's supposed to be the idea that the book was like a true legend in universe, that this actually happened, and from that they got their name, the Death Troopers. But I don't think this story needs to happen again. I read it for Halloween. It was okay. I think on a good day, I might give it a 6, but I'm leaning more towards probably a 4 out of 10, just because it didn't really hold much weight. Now, I do know there's a prequel to this book called Red Harvest by the same author, and I know it's supposed to be the original origins of the Blackwing virus from the Old Republic, except it's Sith zombies instead of Stormtrooper zombies, so that seems like way more dangerous. But I am very skeptical about that book as well, especially since there is a quote in that book that is blatantly reworked from the film Taken, so I'm not sure how to feel about that either. So these books aren't necessarily the top tier of legends. They're fine, I'm not hating on anyone that likes these books because they can be fun. It's just not for me. But overall, yeah, 4 out of 10. Interesting idea, poor execution, just wasn't for me. But what are your thoughts? Did you read Death Troopers? Did you enjoy it? Have you not read it yet and I just completely spoiled the entire thing for you? Let me know in the comments down below. But until the next book review, be it Red Harvest or something else, thank you all so much for stopping by, and we hope to see you again very soon.